My sister disabled the smoke alarms because noise hurt her feelings. When I dragged her out of the fire, she screamed and had me arrested for assault. When I begged my parents to finally protect me, my mother whispered, "We just want peace in the house." So I stopped speaking. Last night, my sister sent me a photo of our old living room, blackened, gutted, captioned, "Do you feel better now?" My grandmother demanded I carry my dead grandfather's baby. She'd saved his frozen sperm for 40 years and said I needed to get pregnant immediately to keep his legacy alive. My grandmother had always been obsessed with my grandfather, who died before I was born. She kept his clothes in their bedroom, set his place at dinner, and talked to his photographs like he was still alive. When I was young, I thought it was sweet how much she loved him. She'd tell me I had his eyes, his hands, his spirit. She said I was more his granddaughter than anyone else because I carried his essence. I didn't understand why she made me sit in his old chair or wear his reading glasses until I turned 18 and she finally revealed her plan. That's when she took me to the basement freezer I'd never been allowed to open. "This freezer is full of dry ice and your grandfather's legacy," she said. 20 vials of his perfect sperm. She explained that she'd been waiting for the right vessel, someone who shared his bloodline but was young and pure enough to carry his seed properly. "He always wanted more children," she said. "You're going to make that dream come true." When I recoiled in horror, she gripped my shoulders. "Don't you understand? You get to bring him back. Part of him will walk this earth again, and you're the only one who can do it. Your eggs plus his sperm equals resurrection." She already had appointments scheduled at a fertility clinic that didn't ask questions. The first insemination was next week. I ran straight to my parents, but they already knew. "It's what he would have wanted," my mother said, not meeting my eyes. I packed a bag that night, but my grandmother had disabled my car and hidden the keys. When I tried walking to the bus station, my father followed me in his truck and brought me home. "Where would you even go?" he asked. "She'll find you anywhere." I called the police, but what could I say that didn't sound insane? The operator suggested family counseling. I tried destroying the freezer, but my grandmother had moved the vials to multiple locations. She showed me photos of fridges in her friends' houses, safety deposit boxes at different banks. 20 years of planning, she said. "You think I'd keep them all in one place?" The fertility clinic she'd chosen operated out of a strip mall. I went there alone, planning to tell them everything, but the doctor was her old friend from nursing school. "Your grandmother explained your nervousness," he said, patting my hand. "It's natural to be scared about pregnancy, but family is everything." I realized she'd built an entire network to trap me. 3 days before the appointment, I faked appendicitis to get to the hospital. She came with me. When I tried to tell the nurses, she explained I had anxiety about trying for a baby, and they nodded sympathetically. Every escape route led back to her. She had made me invisible to anyone who might help. The night before the clinic appointment, I barricaded my door with furniture. She pounded on it, screaming that I was keeping my grandfather waiting. I could hear her dragging something heavy down the hallway. She'd brought her portable freezer to my door, sobbing about how the samples might thaw if I didn't come out immediately. 40 years I've kept him alive in there," she wailed. 40 years of paying for storage, checking temperatures, protecting his future. You think you can destroy that with a locked door?" The pounding stopped. Then I heard drilling. She was removing my door from its hinges while crooning my grandfather's favorite song. I ran to my window, but she had nailed boards across the outside while I slept. The room had become a cage. My phone was dead, the charger mysteriously missing. She had planned this for years, and I had walked right into it. The door fell inward with a crash. She stood in my doorway, holding a turkey baster and a cooler, her nightgown splattered with something. "If you won't go to the clinic," she said calmly, "we'll do this the old-fashioned way. Your grandfather didn't believe in modern medicine anyway." Behind her, my parents stood like zombies, trained to never interfere with her will. I tried to push past them, but my father grabbed me. He was crying as he held my arms. "Just let her do it," he whispered. "She'll never stop. She'll never let you go." My mother helped drag me to my bed while my grandmother prepared her supplies with practiced efficiency. "I was a nurse before I met your grandfather," she said, drawing the thawed sperm into a syringe. "I could get you pregnant in my sleep." She approached with the syringe like it was a sacred ritual. "Your grandfather was the only man who ever mattered. I'm not waiting one more minute for his dreams to come true." I thrashed, but my parents held me down. My grandmother pushed my legs apart with clinical detachment. She kissed the vial like a holy relic. "You're coming back to me now, sweetheart." She positioned the syringe between my legs. My mother turned her face away but kept her grip on my ankles. The room spun. The last thing I saw before I passed out was my grandmother preparing her turkey baster, finally ready to resurrect the dead. I woke up on my bed, still dressed, with sunlight streaming through the gaps in the boarded windows. My body ached from struggling against my parents' grip. The memory of last night crashed over me like ice water. My grandmother, the syringe, the turkey baster. I shot upright, checking myself frantically. Everything seemed normal. Had she actually done it? Had I escaped somehow? My bedroom door hung crooked on its hinges. The furniture I'd used as a barricade lay scattered across the floor. On my nightstand sat a glass of orange juice and a note in my grandmother's spidery handwriting. "Drink this, sweetheart. You need your vitamins now." I stumbled to my feet, legs shaking. The house was eerily quiet. Through my doorway, I could see the hallway stretching toward the stairs. No sign of my family. I crept forward, avoiding the creaky floorboard near my dresser. In the kitchen, my grandmother hummed while scrambling eggs. She wore her favorite apron, the one with embroidered roses that my grandfather had given her. My parents sat at the table, staring at their coffee cups like they held the secrets of the universe. My grandmother turned when she heard my footsteps. Her face lit up with a joy that made my skin crawl. She rushed over and placed both hands on my stomach, pressing gently. "How are we feeling this morning? Any nausea?" That's perfectly normal in early pregnancy. She guided me to a chair before I could pull away. "I made your grandfather's favorite breakfast. He always said eggs were brain food for babies." I pushed the plate away. My father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. My mother traced patterns in her coffee with a spoon, creating tiny whirlpools that went nowhere. "I need to use the bathroom," I said. My grandmother's smile never wavered. "Of course, dear, but don't lock the door. We wouldn't want you fainting and hitting your head, not in your condition." I walked slowly, testing my body for any sign of what she might have done while I was unconscious. In the bathroom, I found the pregnancy tests she'd already laid out on the counter. 5 different brands, all still in their boxes. A sticky note on the mirror read, "Test every morning until we see those beautiful 2 lines." I splashed cold water on my face, trying to think. The bathroom window was painted shut. Had been for years. Even if I broke it, the drop to the concrete patio would hurt. Maybe even hurt the baby she thought was already growing inside me. The baby, my grandfather's baby. The thought made me gag. I returned to find my grandmother had pulled out photo albums. She patted the seat beside her on the couch. "Come look at your grandfather when he was young. See if you can spot the family resemblance." The photos showed a man I'd never met, frozen in time. Him in his Navy uniform, him holding my infant mother, him standing beside the old Buick he'd restored. In every picture, my grandmother stood beside him, clutching his arm like she was afraid he'd float away. "He had the most beautiful hands," she said, tracing his image with one finger. "Surgeon's hands, I always said, just like yours." She grabbed my wrist, comparing my fingers to the man in the photograph. "Perfect match. That baby will have his hands too." I yanked away. "There is no baby." Her smile turned pitying. "Not yet, but there will be. I made sure of that last night." My stomach dropped. "What did you do?" "What needed to be done. You were so upset fighting like that. I couldn't risk you hurting yourself or damaging the samples, so I gave you something to help you sleep. Just a little sedative in your dinner. Then I could work without all that thrashing." The room tilted. I gripped the couch arm to steady myself. "Don't look so worried," she continued. "I was very gentle, used proper medical technique. The turkey baster was just for show, to scare you into cooperating. I have professional equipment. 20 years of planning, remember? I've thought of everything." My mother finally looked up from her coffee. Her eyes were red, rimmed, hollow. "She's telling the truth," she whispered. I held the flashlight while she worked. "It's done," my grandmother added proudly. 3 vials. I wasn't taking any chances. Used 3 whole vials to make sure it took. Your grandfather always said anything worth doing was worth doing right. I ran back to the bathroom and vomited until nothing came up but bile. My grandmother appeared in the doorway with a cool washcloth and ginger ale. "Morning sickness already? Oh, that's a wonderful sign. I was sick as a dog when I was pregnant with your mother. Threw up every morning for 3 months straight." She pressed the washcloth to my forehead with practiced care. "Your grandfather would make me dry toast and bring it to bed. Said it was the least he could do since I was carrying his child." There was something deeply unsettling about how methodical she was. 40 years of keeping frozen sperm, building a whole network of people, even having her old nursing friend at that clinic. I shoved past her, heading for the front door. locked. The windows in the living room had new bars installed, on the inside, painted white to match the trim. When had she done that? How long had she been preparing my prison? I had those put in last month, she said, following my gaze. Told the contractor we'd had break-ins. Can't be too careful with a baby on the way. I spun to face her. I'll get a termination of pregnancy. The words hung in the air like a challenge. My grandmother's face went very still. Then she smiled again. That terrible, knowing smile. No, you won't. My grandmother leaned in, calm and certain. Every clinic within a 100-mile radius has your photo. I told them you're my mentally ill granddaughter who has delusions about being pregnant. Said you've been trying to get unnecessary procedures. They were very understanding. Gave me their word they'd call me if you showed up. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through emails. See, responses from every single one. They're so grateful when family members take an active role in their loved one's care. I sank onto the couch. She had thought of everything. 20 years of planning, she'd said. 20 years of waiting for me to be old enough to carry her dead husband's child. Why me? I whispered. Why not my mother? Why not do this years ago? My grandmother sat beside me, smoothing my hair like she used to when I was small. Your mother was never right for it. Too much of her father in her, not enough of mine. But you, from the moment you were born, I knew. You had his eyes, immediately. That same gray-blue like storm clouds. And as you grew, it only became clearer. The way you held your pencil, the way you laughed, even your walk, all him. She pulled out another photo album, this one full of pictures of me through the years. Next to each one, she'd placed a corresponding photo of my grandfather at a similar age. The resemblance was unsettling. I've been preparing you without you knowing it. The vitamins I've been giving you since you were 12, prenatal, building up your body for this moment. The family medical history I had you fill out last year, genetic screening, everything has been leading to this. My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window and stared out through the bars. His shoulders shook silently. Don't mind him, my grandmother said. He's emotional about becoming a grandfather, even if it is in an unconventional way. It's sick, I said. You're sick. This whole thing is insane. She patted my knee gently. You'll understand when you hold that baby. When you see your grandfather's features in that tiny face, the love you'll feel, it's indescribable. And I'll be right there with you. We'll raise him together. I've already started converting the guest room into a nursery. I stood on shaking legs. I'm leaving. You can't keep me here forever. Actually, she said, pulling a folder from the side table, I can. Power of attorney. Had it drawn up years ago when you had that appendectomy at 16. You signed papers while you were groggy from anesthesia. Among them was a document giving me medical power of attorney in case of emergency. And what's more of an emergency than a pregnancy and a young woman showing signs of mental distress? The papers looked official. My signature was at the bottom, shaky but recognizable. I remembered that surgery. Remembered signing things while the nurse held my hand and told me it was routine paperwork. That's not legal, I said. You tricked me. Prove it. You were of age. You signed willingly. No court in the world would overturn it without clear evidence of coercion. And who's going to believe you over a concerned grandmother trying to help her pregnant granddaughter through a difficult time? She stood, gathering the photo albums. Now, let's talk about prenatal care. I've scheduled your first appointment for next week. My friend from the clinic will come here, make it easier for you. We'll do ultrasounds right in the living room. Won't that be nice? I spent the rest of the day searching for a way out. Every door locked from the outside, every window barred or boarded. My cell phone? Missing. The landline? Disconnected. Even the knives had been removed from the kitchen, replaced with plastic cutlery. My grandmother shadowed my every move, chattering about baby names and nursery themes. Your grandfather always liked traditional names. James for a boy after his father, Elizabeth for a girl after his mother. Though I suppose we'll know it's a boy, won't we? The men in his family always had boys first. That night, she made me take vitamins while she watched. Folic acid is crucial in early pregnancy, she said, placing the pills in my hand. And these omega-3s will help with brain development. Your grandfather was so smart. Scored in the 99th percentile on his Navy aptitude tests. I palmed the pills, planning to flush them later, but she checked my mouth, even under my tongue. Made me drink a full glass of water while she watched my throat to ensure I swallowed. I know all the tricks, she said. 20 years of planning, remember? My room had been transformed while I was downstairs. The boards on the windows now had decorative curtains hung over them. A baby monitor sat on my dresser, the camera pointed at my bed. Books about pregnancy lined my bookshelf where my novels used to be. "I'll be watching," my grandmother said, indicating the monitor, "in case you need anything. Morning sickness can come at any time." She kissed my forehead before leaving, then pulled my door closed behind her. I heard the unmistakable click of a padlock on the outside. I lay in the dark, hand pressed to my stomach. Was something already growing inside me? Could I feel it? The thought made me want to tear my skin off. 3 vials, she'd said. 3 vials of my dead grandfather's sperm, forced inside me while I was unconscious. The violation of it made me shake with rage and disgust, but rage wouldn't get me out. I needed to think, to plan. My grandmother had 20 years of preparation, but I had something she didn't expect. I had her obsession, and I could use it against her. She needed me healthy for this pregnancy she believed was starting. That meant she couldn't hurt me, couldn't drug me too heavily, couldn't let me deteriorate. She needed me cooperative, eventually. That gave me leverage. I stared at the baby monitor's red light in the darkness. Somewhere in this house, my grandmother was watching that feed, waiting for signs of morning sickness or distress, waiting for her dead husband to be reborn through my body. I closed my eyes and began to plan. The morning brought my grandmother's footsteps outside my door at exactly 6:00. The padlock clicked open and she entered, carrying a tray of breakfast and more vitamins. I pretended to be asleep while she set everything on my nightstand and adjusted the baby monitor's angle. After she left, I examined the pills more carefully. The prenatal vitamins looked legitimate, but 2 unmarked white tablets worried me. I hid them in a tear in my mattress and swallowed only the vitamins, knowing she'd check later. My first real chance came during my supervised shower. My grandmother sat on the toilet lid, humming, while I washed behind the frosted glass door. I noticed the bathroom cabinet's mirror had a loose screw. While the water ran, I worked it free with my fingernail until I could slip my hand behind and feel around. My fingers found something cold and metal, a spare key. I palmed it and finished my shower, wrapping myself in the robe my grandmother held out. The key pressed against my palm as she braided my wet hair, talking about how pregnancies made hair grow thicker and shinier. Back in my room, I tested the key on my padlock. Too small. I tried it on the window locks. Nothing. Finally, I found it opened my old jewelry box, which my grandmother had moved to the top shelf of my closet. Inside, I discovered my driver's license, some cash she had confiscated, and most importantly, my old flip phone from high school. The battery was dead, but maybe the charger was still in the garage. My grandmother called me down for lunch. She'd made tomato soup, crackers, and ginger tea. My parents sat at the table like mannequins, barely acknowledging my presence. I forced myself to eat while my grandmother discussed nursery paint colors. After lunch, she announced we were going shopping for maternity clothes. My heart raced, finally a chance to get out of the house, but my hopes crashed when she brought out a wheelchair. She explained that pregnancies made women dizzy and she couldn't risk me falling in public. My father wheeled me to the van while my mother walked behind, carrying my grandmother's purse. At the mall, my grandmother kept one hand on the wheelchair at all times. When I tried to speak to a sales clerk, she quickly interrupted, explaining I had severe anxiety and to please be patient with me. The maternity store felt like another trap closing around me. My grandmother held up flowing dresses and elastic-waisted pants, discussing how my body would change over the coming months. She bought thousands of dollars worth of clothes in increasing sizes, enough to last through an entire pregnancy. On the drive home, I spotted a police car at a red light. I tried to catch the officer's eye, but my grandmother noticed and quickly pulled a sunshade across my window. She reminded my father to take the back roads home, avoiding what she called stressful traffic. That evening, she introduced a new routine. She brought out a blood pressure cuff and thermometer, recording my vitals in a notebook. She measured my waist with a tape measure, marking the number down with satisfaction. She even had me step on a scale, noting my weight as a baseline. During dinner, I noticed my mother kept glancing at me with something like guilt in her eyes. When my grandmother went to get dessert, my mother leaned forward slightly. Her lips moved like she wanted to speak, but my father grabbed her wrist. They stared at each other until my mother looked away. Window bars painted white to blend in. That's interior design meets maximum security prison. She really went for the cozy captivity look here, complete with baby monitor surveillance and padlocked bedroom doors. My grandmother returned with sugar-free pudding, explaining that gestational diabetes ran in families. She watched me eat every bite, then supervised my evening vitamins. This time, I couldn't hide the white pills. She stood over me until I swallowed them, then checked my mouth again. Within an hour, I felt drowsy. The white pills were sedatives, keeping me compliant and sleepy. I fought to stay conscious, but my eyelids grew heavy. The last thing I saw was my grandmother adjusting the baby monitor, ensuring she could watch me sleep. I woke in the middle of the night with a strange clarity. The sedatives had worn off just enough for me to think clearly. I crept to my closet and retrieved the flip phone, then listened at my door. The house was silent. Using a bobby pin, I managed to lift the window lock just enough to create a gap. Cool air rushed in. I pushed the window up inch by inch, wincing at every creak. The bars outside were solid, but I could fit my arm through. I reached down and felt along the exterior wall until my fingers found what I was looking for: the outdoor outlet where we used to plug in Christmas lights. I grabbed a lamp cord from under my bed and carefully fed it through the bars, plugging in my phone charger. The phone would need hours to charge, but it was a start. I pulled everything back inside and closed the window, my heart pounding. The next morning, my grandmother seemed suspicious. She checked my pupils, felt my forehead, and asked if I'd slept well. I acted groggy from the sedatives, which seemed to satisfy her. She mentioned that the doctor would visit tomorrow for my first prenatal checkup. During breakfast, she pulled out a new addition to her collection, a fetal Doppler monitor. She explained she'd be checking for a heartbeat soon, probably within the next few weeks. The thought of her pressing that device against my stomach, searching for signs of my grandfather's resurrection, made me physically ill. I spent the morning pretending to read pregnancy books while actually studying my grandmother's routines. She checked on me every 30 minutes. She kept the house keys on a chain around her neck. She had my father patrol the backyard twice a day. Every detail mattered. After lunch, she decided I needed fresh air and exercise. She walked me around the backyard like a prisoner, pointing out where she planned to put a swing set. The elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, waved from her garden. My grandmother waved back cheerfully, calling out that I was expecting and feeling shy about it. That afternoon, while my grandmother prepared dinner, I heard her on the phone with someone. She mentioned my name, confirmed an appointment, and discussed payment in cash. Through the crack under my door, I could see her feet pacing as she talked. She was expanding her network, bringing in more people to ensure her plan succeeded. That night, my mother brought me dinner. She set the tray down with shaking hands and turned to leave, but I grabbed her sleeve. She froze, not meeting my eyes. I pulled her closer and whispered urgently about what grandmother had done, begging for help. My mother's face crumpled. She admitted she knew it was wrong, but felt powerless. My grandmother had something on her, some secret from years ago that would destroy her life if revealed. She couldn't risk it. She pulled away and fled the room, leaving me alone with my meal and my despair. The sedatives that night seemed stronger. I fought them harder, forcing myself to stay partially conscious. Through heavy eyelids, I watched my grandmother enter my room around midnight. She approached my bed and placed her hand on my stomach, whispering to the baby she believed was growing inside me. She told my grandfather's ghost about the nursery plans, about the names she'd chosen, about how his legacy would live on. She promised to raise this child exactly as he would have wanted. Her obsession had consumed any remnant of sanity or maternal love. I was just a vessel to her. The next morning brought the doctor. He arrived with a portable ultrasound machine and a medical bag. My grandmother had me change into a hospital gown and lie on my bed. I tried to tell him this was against my will, but my grandmother quickly explained I had prenatal anxiety and delusions. The doctor, clearly paid well for his discretion, ignored my protests. He performed a basic examination while my grandmother watched eagerly. When he conducted the ultrasound, finding nothing yet, my grandmother wasn't discouraged. She said it was too early, but wanted to establish a baseline. The doctor agreed to return weekly for monitoring. After he left, my grandmother was in high spirits. She showed me the ultrasound printout of my empty uterus, saying we'd see a tiny heartbeat soon. She'd already put the image in a frame labeled, "Baby's first photo, April 14." That night, I finally got my phone charged enough to power on. I muted it immediately and checked for signal. 1 bar. I tried calling 911, but the call wouldn't connect. I sent text messages to everyone I could think of, but they all failed to send. My grandmother must have installed a signal blocker. Desperate, I tried the phone's primitive internet browser. It loaded slowly, but I managed to access my email. I typed a frantic message to my best friend from college, explaining everything. Just as I hit send, my door opened. My grandmother stood there with a handheld signal detector, the kind used to find hidden cameras. It was beeping steadily, pointed directly at me. Her face showed no surprise, only disappointment. She held out her hand for the phone. I had no choice but to give it to her. She examined it, saw my failed attempts at communication, and shook her head sadly. I installed signal blockers throughout the house months ago, she said. The only working phone is my landline, which I control. As punishment, she moved my mattress to the floor and removed all furniture I could stand on. She installed a new lock on my closet and confiscated everything except basic clothing. The baby monitor was joined by 2 more cameras, covering every angle of the room. Then she introduced a new rule. I would now sleep in restraints to prevent any midnight escape attempts. She produced medical-grade wrist restraints, the kind used in hospitals, and secured me to eye bolts she'd installed in the floor. I could move enough to be comfortable, but not enough to cause trouble. The next few days blurred together in a haze of sedatives and supervision. My grandmother maintained her cheerful facade, acting like we were preparing for a joyous occasion rather than perpetrating a nightmare. She read to my stomach from children's books. She played classical music for the baby's development. She continued her obsessive documentation of my body. My father grew increasingly uncomfortable with the restraints and cameras, but my grandmother shut down his weak protests. She reminded him of his complicity, of how he'd helped hold me down that first night. He was trapped by his own guilt and fear. On the 5th day of my new imprisonment, my grandmother made a mistake. She left her notebook on the kitchen counter while answering the door. I glimpsed pages of meticulous notes about my cycle, my body temperature, optimal fertilization windows. She'd been tracking me for years without my knowledge. But more importantly, I saw a page titled Contingency Plans. It listed various scenarios and responses. If I escaped, watchers at bus stations and airports. If I went to police, documents proving my mental instability. If I tried to get pregnant by someone else, medical strategies to claim the baby was still my grandfather's. The doorbell had been her doctor friend returning with blood test results. He confirmed I wasn't pregnant yet, which frustrated my grandmother. She decided to attempt another insemination immediately, despite the doctor suggesting they wait for optimal timing. That night, she prepared her medical supplies again, while my parents stood guard outside my room. I begged them to stop her. They wouldn't even look at me. My grandmother entered with her syringe and cooler, ready to force more of my grandfather's genetic material into my body. This time I fought differently. Instead of physical resistance, I went completely limp. I forced my body to be dead weight, making it harder for her to position me. I hyperventilated, making myself dizzy and causing my muscles to cramp. My grandmother grew frustrated, worried I might hurt myself and damage my reproductive system. She decided to wait until I calmed down, but I kept up the act. I made myself vomit the dinner I'd eaten, claiming the stress was making me sick. She couldn't risk attempting insemination while I was in that state. Finally, she gave me a stronger sedative and decided to try again tomorrow. But I'd bought myself time. And during my hyperventilation act, I'd noticed something crucial. The eye bolt holding my left wrist restraint had loosened slightly from my thrashing over the past few days. The wood around it was starting to splinter. I spent hours that night working on that bolt, using the only tool I had, the restraint itself. By pulling at specific angles, I could feel it giving way bit by bit. My wrist was raw and bleeding by morning, but the bolt was definitely looser. My grandmother noticed my injured wrist and treated it with antibiotic cream, scolding me for struggling against the restraints. She wrapped it in gauze, which actually helped hide the damage I was doing to the bolt. She was so focused on protecting my reproductive health that she missed the real threat. During my supervised bathroom break, I overheard my parents arguing downstairs. My father wanted to stop this madness, saying it had gone too far. My mother reminded him they were both accomplices now. If I ever got free, they'd face consequences too. They were trapped in a prison of their own making. Why did my grandmother have military-grade signal blockers just ready to go? Was she planning this specific scenario for years, or does she always prepare for hostage situations? The way she pulled out that signal detector the moment the phone charged, it was too convenient, like she had waited for exactly this moment. That afternoon, she announced she'd hired a private nurse to help monitor me. The woman would arrive tomorrow and stay in the guest room, the one not being converted into a nursery. This meant constant professional supervision and even less chance of escape. I worked frantically on the bolt that night, ignoring the pain in my wrist. By dawn, I could pull it almost completely free. but I had to be strategic. If I escaped at the wrong time, I'd be caught immediately. I needed to wait for the perfect moment. The nurse arrived after breakfast. Her name was Catherine, a stern woman in her 50s, who'd clearly done this kind of work before. My grandmother introduced me as her special needs granddaughter who required constant care during a difficult pregnancy. Catherine accepted this without question, probably used to discretion in her private practice work. She took over my medical monitoring with cold efficiency. She drew blood, checked my vitals, and examined my injured wrist. She noted the damage in her chart, but said nothing. She was being paid not to ask questions. My grandmother seemed relieved to have professional help. She spent the morning showing Catherine around, explaining my condition and the importance of strict routines. Catherine nodded along, absorbing every detail of my captivity. That night brought a new horror. Catherine prepared an IV line, explaining she'd be administering nutrients and hormones to optimize my body for pregnancy. I realized my grandmother was escalating, using her nurse friend to turn me into a perfect incubator. As the IV dripped into my arm, I felt my hope slipping away. The bolt was loose, but with Catherine watching, when would I ever get the chance to use it? My grandmother had thought of everything. 20 years of obsession had built the perfect trap. But then, I noticed something. Catherine had a routine too. She checked on me every 2 hours during the night like clockwork, but between 2 and 4 a.m. she took a longer break, probably sleeping. That was my window. I spent the next day memorizing every sound in the house, the creak of the third stair, the squeak of the kitchen door, the hum of the refrigerator. I needed to navigate in complete darkness and silence. That evening, my grandmother visited again with photo albums. This time, she showed me pictures of my grandfather's childhood home, explaining how she'd saved money to buy it back. "That's where we'll raise the baby," she said, "in the same rooms where your grandfather played as a child." The sedatives that night seemed lighter. Maybe Catherine had adjusted the dose, or maybe I was building tolerance. Either way, I stayed conscious enough to watch the clock. At 2:15 a.m., I heard Catherine's footsteps fade toward the guest room. I waited another 15 minutes to be sure, then began working the bolt free. It came loose with a soft pop that sounded like thunder in the silence. My left hand was free. I used it to unbuckle the right restraint, my fingers clumsy from hours of restricted blood flow. Finally free, I stood on shaking legs. The IV line was still in my arm. I carefully removed it, pressing gauze against the puncture to stop any bleeding that might leave a trail. Every movement felt too loud, too obvious. I crept to my door and listened. Nothing. The padlock was on the outside, but I'd noticed the doorframe was old wood. Using the metal bolt I'd freed, I worked at the screws holding the lock plate. Years of paint made them stiff, but desperation gave me strength. One screw came free, then another. The lock plate hung by a single screw now. I paused, listening for any sign I'd been heard. The house remained silent. I worked the final screw until the plate fell away, catching it before it could clatter to the floor. My door swung open silently. The hallway stretched before me, dark and full of obstacles. I knew my grandmother's room was at the end, my parents' room beside it. Catherine was in the guest room downstairs. I had to pass them all to reach freedom. I moved in slow motion, testing each floorboard before putting my weight on it. The third stair creaked. I stretched my leg to skip it entirely. The kitchen door squeaked, but only if opened quickly. I eased it open over 30 seconds, holding my breath. The kitchen was my next challenge. My grandmother had removed all the knives, but I needed supplies. I found car keys in a drawer, not mine, but my father's spare set. I grabbed a jacket from the hook and slipped a water bottle into the pocket. The front door was my biggest obstacle. It had multiple locks and an alarm system, but I'd watched my grandmother disable it every morning and knew the code. And my grandfather's birthday. I punched it in with trembling fingers and heard the soft beep of success. I unlocked each deadbolt slowly, wincing at every click. Finally, the door was open. Cool night air hit my face like freedom itself. I wanted to run, but I forced myself to close the door quietly behind me. My father's truck was in the driveway. I'd never driven it, but desperation is a quick teacher. I released the parking brake and let it roll backward down the slight incline, not starting the engine until I reached the street. The engine roared to life, shattering the night's silence. I didn't wait to see if lights came on in the house. I drove, taking random turns, putting distance between me and my prison. I had no phone, no money beyond the few dollars from my jewelry box, and nowhere safe to go, but I was free. For now. I drove for an hour before pulling into a 24-hour gas station. The lights inside were harsh and flickering, making everything feel surreal. The attendant gave me strange looks. I was still in pajamas, my wrist wrapped in gauze, my eyes wild. I asked to use their phone, claiming car trouble. He hesitated, then handed it over reluctantly. There was only one number I'd memorized besides 911, my college roommate, Sarah. She answered on the fifth ring, groggy and confused. "Sarah," I whispered, "it's me. I need help. Please come get me." 3 hours away, and she didn't even hesitate. She promised to leave immediately. I waited in the truck, curled up beneath my father's old jacket, my eyes fixed on every car that passed. Every pair of headlights made my heart race. Had my grandmother discovered I was gone yet? Had she activated her network of watchers? Dawn was breaking when Sarah's car finally pulled up beside me. She took one look at my condition and pulled me into a fierce hug. I broke down completely, sobbing, gasping, shaking, as I poured out the whole story. Sarah wanted to go straight to the police, but I explained everything: my grandmother's documents, her carefully constructed lies, the power of attorney. We needed evidence. We needed a strategy. Sarah drove me straight to her apartment in the city. She lived in a gated complex with security cameras and a guard at the entrance. It was the first time I felt even a sliver of safety. Inside, she helped me shower and gave me clean clothes. The normalcy of it, clean towels, cereal boxes, scented candles, felt foreign. Sarah was a law student. She immediately got to work. She began documenting everything, and photos of my wrists, a written timeline of events, a full catalog of what I remembered, down to the smallest details. She researched the legality of power of attorney obtained under sedation and how to counter false claims of mental illness. But we knew time was short. My grandmother had resources, connections, and obsessive determination. As if summoned by our planning, Sarah's phone rang. Unknown number. She answered cautiously, then handed it to me with wide eyes. It was my grandmother. Her voice was calm, syrupy. "Dania, are you safe? Everyone's so worried about you. You just forgot to take your medication, that's all. Please come home. We'll make this right. We love you." I said nothing. She continued, as if she were the sane one. "No more locks, no more restraints, just family, just us. We can be together again." I hung up. The fact that she had found Sarah's number so quickly, it chilled me to my core. We needed to move fast. Sarah suggested we drive to her law school campus 2 hours away. She had a professor, Dr. Gutierrez, who specialized in family law and abuse cases. We packed quickly. Sarah grabbed her legal textbooks, laptop, and her pepper spray, just in case. As we loaded her car, I noticed a white van parked across the street. It hadn't been there earlier. My paranoia spiked. It looked like the kind of vehicle her medical friends might use. We left through the back exit of the complex, Sarah taking the long way to the freeway. She checked the mirrors constantly. So did I. The world outside looked normal. People heading to work, joggers, school buses. No one could guess what I was fleeing. Halfway to the city, Sarah's phone rang again. This time, it was my mother. Sarah put it on speaker. "Dania," my mother's voice cracked. "Please come home. You're sick. You're not well. Grandma is beside herself. She hasn't slept. Neither have we." Her voice broke into sobs. "You're putting yourself and the baby at risk. The baby that didn't exist, the medication that kept me sedated, the help that was just captivity." I stared out the window and said nothing. Then finally, "I'm never coming back." I ended the call. Sarah turned off her phone's location services. "We have to assume they're tracking everything," she said quietly. We reached the law school by noon. Dr. Gutierrez agreed to see us immediately. His office was filled with law books and dusty case files. He had kind eyes, the kind that have seen too much. He listened to my story without interrupting. Occasionally, he jotted notes. When I finished, he leaned back and exhaled. "Cases like yours are more common than people think," he said. "It's just that most never make it out." He made a series of calls while we sat there, silent and still. Within the hour, he had arranged a restraining order, hearing for the next morning, a psychiatric evaluation by a neutral expert, and a stay at a confidential safe house for domestic abuse victims. The apartment was in a nondescript building. No listed address, cameras at every entrance. It wasn't cozy, but it was secure. Sarah stayed with me. She didn't want me alone, even for a minute. That night we saw my face on the news. Missing person alert. My grandmother had reported me missing. She claimed I was a vulnerable adult who had disappeared without her medication. The broadcast urged anyone who saw me to call immediately. The anchor's tone was gentle, concerned. This young woman may be confused or disoriented. I screamed and threw the remote across the room. Sarah turned off the TV and held me until the shaking stopped. This is all part of her narrative, she said, but tomorrow we start taking it back. I barely slept that night. Sarah stayed up prepping questions, coaching me on what to say. We needed the judge to see me for who I really was, not mentally ill, not delusional, but traumatized and finally free. Morning came too fast. Sarah had picked out an outfit for me. Slacks, blazer, flat shoes, professional, calm, credible. At the courthouse, Dr. Gutierrez introduced me to the attorney he'd arranged, Patricia, a woman with fire in her voice and steel in her spine. The hearing was in a small conference room, not a full courtroom. Intimate. Exposing. Then I saw them. My grandmother, my parents, and their lawyer. My grandmother wore a beige sweater set in pearls. Her expression radiated concern and love. She looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile. She even gave me a teary smile, like she was relieved to see me safe. It made me want to scream. We sat. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, reviewed the documents. The power of attorney. My injury photos. The affidavit from the trauma counselor Sarah had arranged. Patricia opened our side with calm authority. She outlined everything. The forced insemination attempts, the imprisonment, the sedation, the 20-year obsession. Then it was my turn. I stood, swallowed, and told the truth. I kept my voice steady. I focused on facts, not feelings. I described the freezer, the syringes, the restraints. I told the judge about the turkey baster, the forced sedation, the cameras, the IV drips, the padlocked doors, the signal blockers, the falsified medical claims, the vials of sperm. The judge didn't interrupt. She listened, eyes narrowed, pen tapping slowly against the edge of the desk. Then came the cross-examination. My grandmother's lawyer was smooth, practiced. If this situation was so dire, he said, why didn't you report it earlier? Why wait until now to take action? Why, if your grandmother is so dangerous, were you living under her roof at all? He suggested I was confused, that I'd been manipulated by friends, especially Sarah, that I was unstable and rejecting the very family who cared most for me. Then my grandmother testified. She was brilliant. She admitted to being overprotective, maybe even too involved, but always from love. She claimed I had misunderstood her desire for me to one day have children. All the equipment, nostalgia from her nursing days, the restraints, a temporary measure after Dinia became violent during a delusional episode, the freezer, for long-term food storage, the syringes, old medical supplies. She cried at the perfect moments. She spoke of my childhood, how I'd always been a little sensitive, easily overwhelmed. She painted herself as a devoted caretaker, desperate to help a mentally unwell granddaughter. My parents backed her. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue. My father said he'd seen me talking to myself, planning escapes from imaginary threats. They testified that I had refused medication, that I'd grown paranoid, that I was mentally ill. I stared at them as they told lie after lie. My own family, all of them trying to paint me as insane so they could maintain control. The judge called a recess. Patricia leaned close. It's going better than expected, but she's very convincing. The judge will need overwhelming proof. During the break, my grandmother approached me. Patricia stepped between us, but my grandmother reached for my hands before I could pull away. Her voice trembled. Dinia, please, come home. We can fix this. I know I went too far, but everything I did, every decision, it was for love, for family. You'll understand someday. She looked so sincere, so broken. And for the briefest second, I almost believed her. Almost. The hearing resumed. Patricia called Sarah to the stand. Sarah recounted the morning I showed up at her door, my injuries, my condition, the fear in my eyes. She described the gas station, the sleepless nights, the news alerts, the unknown cars outside her apartment. Then Dr. Gutierrez took the stand. He explained coercive control in clinical terms, how long-term grooming, sedation, isolation, and gaslighting were forms of abuse. He described how my grandmother's care had crossed the line into medical captivity. Then came our final evidence, subpoenaed financial records. Patricia laid them out for the judge. And thousands spent on fertility clinics under fake names. Years of payments to a network of doctors. Invoices for sedatives and medical-grade restraints. Purchase orders for wireless cameras, fetal monitors, and signal jammers. The courtroom was silent. Even my grandmother's lawyer looked shaken. The judge took a long pause before speaking. I am granting a temporary restraining order, she said, effective immediately. Ms. Dinia is not to be contacted or approached by her grandmother under any circumstances. My heart raced. But, the judge continued, the question of the power of attorney is more complex. I am ordering a full psychological and legal review of its validity. That process will take 30 days. In the meantime, it will remain active, but limited to non-emergency decisions. It wasn't a full win, but it was a start. My grandmother's expression cracked. Tears spilled down her face, not performative this time, real, furious grief. She stood as the judge adjourned the session, calling out to me as the bailiff stepped in. You're making a mistake, Dinia. You're destroying everything. His legacy, our family, everything he dreamed of. My parents ushered her out, both of them crying. Patricia exhaled slowly. We bought time. That's all we need. Outside the courthouse, I collapsed into Sarah's arms. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. That night in the safe house, I stood by the window. No bars, no locks, no cameras. I was still scared, still raw, but I was no longer alone. The days that followed were filled with cautious steps toward freedom. I moved in with Sarah temporarily while we waited for the court's final ruling. Her apartment felt like a sanctuary, windows that opened, locks I controlled, meals I chose. But every comfort carried a shadow. Each knock at the door made me flinch. Every unmarked envelope made my stomach twist. Dr. Gutierrez connected me with a trauma specialist, Dr. Snow, who agreed to see me twice a week. She didn't ask what had happened right away. She just let me talk when I was ready. The conditioning will linger, she warned. Freedom is a process, not just a status. And she was right. I found myself waking at 6 a.m. automatically, checking for cameras in corners, swallowing vitamins before I realized I didn't need them anymore. I started to reclaim my life piece by piece. Sarah helped me build a basic resume using the volunteer work I'd done under my grandmother's watch. A local bookstore just a few blocks away was hiring. The manager, Joan, a kind, older woman, didn't ask too many questions. She hired me part-time after a short interview. I stocked shelves, rang up customers, gave reading recommendations. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. With my first paycheck, I bought a secondhand coat and a lockbox for my personal documents. We found a small studio apartment that I could afford. 4th floor, no elevator, no landlord intrusion. The first night alone, I barely slept. I kept expecting footsteps outside my door, but they never came. Then, just when the silence began to feel safe, a package arrived at the bookstore. It was addressed to me in my grandmother's handwriting. Joan intercepted it before I could see the contents. Inside, a baby blanket, pale yellow, hand-knitted, a note. For when you're ready, all my love, Grandma. It wasn't a gift. It was a threat, a message. She was still watching. I took the package home and put it in my lockbox, not to keep, but to document. Sarah and Patricia helped me file an expanded restraining order. We included, and the blanket, the note, a log of every strange call, every shadowy car, photos of the security camera footage from Joan's bookstore. The judge approved it. Now the order included harassment by proxy. Anyone acting on my grandmother's behalf would be subject to the same legal consequences. It didn't stop her. 2 weeks later, my employer received an anonymous call claiming I was mentally unstable, that I posed a risk to customers. Joan didn't believe it, but the damage was done. People began whispering. Someone left a 1-star review online. Watch out for the dangerous girl at the register. I started taking different routes home, wore a baseball cap, varied my schedule. Then another package appeared. This one containing parenting books, prenatal vitamins, and a note that read, "It's not too late. He's still waiting." I burned it in the sink, but I kept the ashes, more evidence. Sarah urged me to consider moving to another city, starting over entirely, but I refused. I've already lost enough, I said. My life is here. She doesn't get to steal that too. Dr. Snow helped me understand that my grandmother's obsession had evolved. She could no longer control my body, so now she wanted to control my reality. She couldn't force the pregnancy anymore, but she could still make me feel like her ghost was always just outside the door. I refused to let that happen. I started journaling daily, documenting every trigger, every moment of strength, every flashback. I spoke in group therapy about reproductive coercion, about how control doesn't always come with bruises. I shared my story anonymously online, and slowly I began to feel powerful again. Then I met Key. He was a regular customer at the bookstore, kind eyes, patient smile. He never asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. One afternoon, I found myself recommending him a book about healing after trauma. He bought it and asked if I'd like to grab coffee sometime. We met in a crowded cafe. I picked the table, the seat, and the exit route. Key didn't flinch when I ordered my drink in a whisper or when I asked him to stay in sight the whole time. He listened when I spoke, and when I finally told him a version of the truth, stripped down, clinical, he didn't run. He simply nodded and said, "Whatever you need to feel safe, I'll do it." Key never asked me to be normal. He just treated me like I already was. The packages stopped for a while after that. Maybe she knew. Maybe she saw his coat hanging on my door, or his name on my mailbox. Or maybe she was planning something new. Because the silence didn't feel like surrender, it felt like waiting. My first birthday in freedom arrived quietly. Sarah baked a cake. Joan dropped off flowers. Key brought candles and a small pendant engraved with my name. We gathered in my tiny apartment, just the four of us and Phoenix, the rescue cat Key and I had adopted together. It was everything I never knew I needed. Simple, safe, chosen. That night, when everyone had gone home, I found a package on my doorstep. No return address. Inside, a photo album. On the cover, to remember the good times. Inside, childhood photos of me with my grandmother. Birthday parties, school plays, Christmas mornings, all cropped to remove my parents. Just me and her, smiling. The last page held a single photo, my grandfather, young, in uniform, holding a baby. A note tucked inside in her familiar handwriting. "You can't run from who you are. He's in your blood, waiting to return. When you're ready to fulfill your destiny, I'll be here. All my love forever, Grandma." I burned the album in the sink, but I kept the note as evidence, as a reminder. She still believed. No court order, no escape, no absence could break the delusion. 2 months passed. Key and I built a quiet rhythm. Books and tea and nights spent watching the sky change colors from my fire escape. Dr. Snow said I was making measurable progress. I was finally able to walk past baby stores without flinching. I no longer reached for prenatal vitamins at the pharmacy, out of habit. Then, another package. This one addressed to Mrs. Dinia Carver, my married name, though we hadn't told anyone. Inside, a hospital gown embroidered with the words, "Baby grandfather." A breast pump and a baby monitor. Joan intercepted it again. Her hands trembled as she handed it to me. "This isn't normal," she whispered. "This is stalking." Sarah traced it to a private investigator, one who specialized in family reunification, hired 6 months ago by my grandmother. He'd been following me the entire time. We confronted him, Patricia at our side. He folded immediately when threatened with legal action. "She said her granddaughter was mentally ill and vulnerable," he said. I believed her. He dropped the case, but we knew she'd just find another. And then I missed my period. I took a test in the staff bathroom of the bookstore. Positive. I sat on the closed toilet lid for 15 minutes, unable to move. The irony was cruel. After everything she'd done to force a pregnancy, it had happened naturally, with someone I loved, someone I chose. Key sat with me on the floor of our kitchen that night. He held my hand, listened, while I whispered every fear I'd buried. Then I looked at him and said, "It's mine this time, not hers, mine." We drove 2 towns over, a clinic where no one knew my name, a quiet procedure, a silent recovery. I felt only one thing, relief. But somehow she still found out. The packages changed. Now they contained death announcements, funeral programs, cards with tiny footprints stamped in black ink, pictures of my grandfather with "murderer" scrawled across his face. The escalation was no longer subtle. Patricia filed for a permanent restraining order and began working with a legal advocacy group specializing in intergenerational coercion. We were building a case for a full psychological hold on my grandmother. Then came the breaking point. I arrived home from work to find my apartment door unlocked. Inside, nothing stolen. But on my pillow, a single photo of my grandmother cradling the blanket she'd knitted, eyes closed, a blissful smile on her face. There was no note, no explanation. Just presence. I filed a police report. They found no fingerprints, no forced entry. The landlord hadn't seen anyone. She'd gotten in, somehow, some way, and that meant she could again. That night, I left. Key and I packed in silence. We moved in with friends while we searched for a more secure building, one with keycard access, security guards, and underground parking. We lived like fugitives. No mail forwarding, no phone in my name. My grandmother faded to a ghost I couldn't see, only feel. Then, 2 months later, the call came. My father. I let it ring 4 times before I picked up. She had a stroke, he said. She's in a care facility now, doesn't know where she is, doesn't remember much, keeps talking to pictures, calls the nurses Dinia. He paused. She's not coming back. I hung up, and I cried. Not for the woman who stalked and imprisoned me, but for the one who once made me peanut butter sandwiches and sang me to sleep. The grandmother I loved had been gone for a long time. This was just the final disappearance. I felt hollow, but free. The packages stopped. The investigator was gone. The photo album was ash. The chains had broken. Months later, I stood in front of my grandfather's grave for the first time. A simple headstone, weathered, forgotten. I placed a flower there, not for him, but for the part of me that had almost been consumed by his legacy. I whispered, "It ends with you." And then I walked away. Epilogue. Now I run the bookstore. Joan retired and left it to me. Sarah passed the bar exam and started a practice in women's rights law. Key and I adopted a dog. We call our little crew the Quiet Revolution. We have dinner on Thursdays, therapy on Mondays, and freedom every single day. And some nights, when I walk home in the dark and catch my reflection in the glass, I remind myself, I am not a vessel. I am not a legacy. I am not her. I am Dania. I survived, and I choose my future.